Horst. She's a second-year master's student in digital humanities. Originally from the Boulder area of Colorado, she got her BA from Earlham College in English with minors in computer science and medieval studies. And her currently scholarly interests include the creation and curation of digital editions. So thank you so much, Eliora. I'll hand it off to you, and you should have full screen sharing capabilities.
Yep, I think I do. Thank you. Can you all see the presentation? All right, good. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon for my workshop on XML transformations with XSLT and JavaScript. In the description of this workshop, I did say that you could be any level coming into this in terms of coding and familiarity with XML and all that. So I'll be going through, hopefully there'll be people of whatever level you are, you'll be able to interact, no problem. So start off with just a basic, what is XML? XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It is a language that's used for encoding documents in a way that is both human and machine readable. Here, markup language refers to programming languages that are used solely to mark and identify pieces of information within documents. They don't perform any functions on those documents. They just help identify things within them. The design of XML is primarily focused on supporting the encoding of documents, but it is robust enough to handle a wide range of arbitrary data structures, including those used frequently in web services. So in my sphere, I've seen it often used with literature, but it has a complete wide range of potential uses. So XML does have some limitations. Unlike other markup languages like HTML, which is hypertext markup language, current web browsers do not automatically transform XML documents into human readable interfaces. So when you load an XML document into just the plain XML document into a modern web browser, web browsers like Firefox and Chrome, they will display the entire XML document, this whole tree, without any styling, without anything. You'll usually get a warning saying there's no styling information associated with it, and it's just kind of that plain text. For an example, this diagram I have here on the right, if you have a document, you just have one line with H1 tags that says hello world. If that document were HTML and you loaded it in a web browser, you would get this nice bold font, big, because HTML has those characteristics associated with that tag. It has definitions for how to treat the data within those tags when it's loaded with a web browser, and modern web browsers know what to do with that. XML has none of that information, so if you try to load that in an XML file, it goes, well, I don't know what an H1 tag is, and there's nothing associated with it, so here's just how it appears in the document. Along with XSLT and JavaScript, which I'll be going over today, there are many APIs, which are application programming interfaces, that can transform XML and customize its styling. So first, we'll talk about XSLT, which stands for Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformations. It was a language designed solely for transforming XML documents into other kinds of documents, such as HTML, plain text, or even other kinds of XML documents. XSLT is a declarative programming language, which means that the language itself is designed to show what a program should accomplish without getting into the specifics of how it needs to be done, which is in contrast to something like C or Java or Fortran, which are imperative programming languages, which describe how something needs to be accomplished. So XSLT relies on pattern matching to perform its transformations. A processor takes each of the documents, takes the XML and the XSLT, and puts them together and compares them, and then spits out a document, whether that's HTML or XML, whatever you're doing with it. So what it does is the XSLT document describes each of the tags that it's going to come across in XML, and it says, oh, well, there's a front tag in this XML document. Is there anything in the XSLT document that describes what a front tag is? And if there is, then it applies those styling elements to it. If not, then it just keeps going. and it just goes through node by node until it's gone through both documents completely. XSLT also uses Xpath, which is a query language developed for XSLT and XML documents. And they're used to perform calculations and different kinds of processes. Xpath also allows XSLT to perform a wide range of functions. And here I mean specifically in the programming sense, not in the kind of general English sense. Functions like operators like equals, doesn't equal, greater than, less than. The ones I have here like concat, substring, rounding numbers, those kind of things. It's not as, you can't create functions as far as I'm aware within Xpath like in other languages, but it does have a big library. So here is the anatomy of an XSLT document, just the pure basics. At the very top, we have just the declaration that this is an XSL style sheet with reference to this particular one. You have to link it to a repository from W3 Schools. I think there are a couple other, but this is the most common one I found. Right below that, you have this XSL Template Match. The slash in there is referring to the entire document. So this is a template match for the entire XML document. Later on, I'll explain more about templates. You can narrow down the range, but at the very top, you always want to declare, yes, we're scanning the whole document. And then you have kind of the main body of the XSLT document, which is in this HTML document formatting. If you're familiar with how HTML works, it looks almost identical. The only real difference is within these HTML tags, you're going to be injecting XSLT queries. And then I'll get to that in a second. But then you, like with most things, you want to close out those tags at the bottom. So those injections, there's a bunch of different ones that I'll go through, and don't worry, I'll have this up later for when we're doing the kind of workshop-y part of it. There's kind of the most basic of selecting data, basically saying that tag right there, I want to pull the data out and put it somewhere else. And that uses the value of selection, and you just say what tag you want to use or you want to grab from. So yeah, I want to grab the author. And so you say select equals, and then in quotations, author tag or whatever tag you've chosen. XSLT doesn't have kind of traditional coding loops, but it does have something that does kind of go through each iteration of a tag, which is the for each kind of loop instance. It does have the kind of format of a loop with the like start and end. Within XSLT, if you see here, I have it in the quotations, I have tag / path. You can define, you don't have to just say like the author tag, it could be the author tag within the book description tag. So you could say, you know, book / author, that kind of thing. And then inside of that, you have what you wanted to spit out within each of those. So if you have, let's say, a catalog of clothing, it could be for each, inside that catalog, you want to spit out each dress, something like that. You can get more specific by adding this kind of square brackets. So you could say, instead of just every dress in this catalog, I want every red dress in this catalog. So you can, if it has that identifier on it within your XML, you can kind of narrow down the range of search. You could sort data alphabetically and numerically within that for each loop by including this sort select and just saying what tag you want to order the list by. So like if you had a list of authors, you could like order it by first name or last name, depending on what tag you're using. There is a kind of basic if statement. Again, if you're familiar with code, this will look familiar to you. You do have to include the if test part of it. And then you just say like, if color equals red, then you have some conditional output, then put this into HTML. The XSLT doesn't really have an if-else structure like other programming languages. It has this choose when structure, which basically does the same thing. When something meets this condition, do this, if not, do something else. You know, so if, you know, this thing, if the dress is red, put it into HTML. If not, put it into something else or don't put it. That kind of thing. So For the kind of hands-on portion of this, I thought it'd be fun to kind of get some hands-on with XSLT. The major issue with trying to find a sandbox environment for working with XML and XSLT is that a lot of modern browsers do not allow for cross-origin loading of documents from local hosts. So if you try to load your XML document in your browser just from your computer and it's linked to an XSLT document, you'll get an error and it will not load anything because it's a security risk. So I defined a workaround, and so there's two different options here, which I've put into the chat. The first one is W3 Schools has an editor, and they do have one set up for XML and XSLT. The one I put in the chat is for their CD catalog, and they've already got data loaded in there, but you can load your own data. I've also linked to a Google Drive. You all should be able to get in no problem with some demo data that I've created, and you could try loading that. And then every time you want to change something, you just hit the that green button underneath, and then you're able to reload the visual below, and it should load no problem. If, sorry, there's the chat. Okay. The other option is that Internet Explorer allows these security risks. So you can load it in Internet Explorer if you most Windows computers should still have it. Unfortunately, I don't have a Mac, so I don't know if Safari or one of those would be able to load. I would hope not, but you never know. But if you have a local text editor and you have a PC, you can edit the code through your text editor and then load it into Internet Explorer, and it should load. So for this exercise, you'll be wanting to look, if you look at the demo data in the Google Drive, the XML and the XSLT. You won't need to look at the other two right now. And so what I figured is, for the next 10 to 15 minutes, we could each go off and kind of play around, see what you can do with it. You can either use, again, with W3 Schools, they've got some data loaded in if you just want to play around with that. I have the demo data that I loaded, which is an XML version of the Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. Or if you have any XML of your own that you wanted to try to play around with. I will say, if you're with either of them really, I haven't tried doing this with a full TEI encoded document yet. So I don't know how well it's going to play with doing this kind of more simplified XSLT transformations, but you're more than welcome to try. If you come across any errors in the W3 area, it's not really robust enough to handle a lot of stuff. So I'll be here the whole time. If you have questions on anything, you can either say them or type them in the chat. But there are some errors I think will come up that are just, this system can't handle it. So here I'm going to leave this up the whole time. I have the XML here, all the different things that you can use. What I went over earlier about selecting data, loops, ifs, all that. I have some kind of basic HTML tags if you aren't as familiar with that and want to play around with it. And then also some kind of basic CSS. The W3 Schools is only pulling from XSLT and XML. So I've included the styling within the XSLT and just a styling tag because you can't have an external CSS document. So that's how it's also in the demo code as well. But you're welcome to try to link it to a separate CSS document if you want to branch out a bit. But yeah, are there any questions before we go to the separate work time? Yeah, Prakriti.
I was just curious, the Google Drive takes me to a .js file, is that correct? Is that where I'm supposed to be headed?
Not yet. The JS is for after that. It's just the XML and the XSLT that you'll need. Right now there should be 4 documents in there.
At least when I click, I don't know if anyone else is having the same problem. It just opens up to that one .js. I can't get into the whole folder.
Oh, no. Let me check. It it's just the only document there is the JavaScript.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, hold on. Let me see if I can showing it for me. Let me make sure it's the right permissions on it. Thought I gave them to the whole file. Oh, no, I accidentally just did the file. All right, let's try this. Let me know if that works. See all four now?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, yeah, so you should just need the Jabberwocky transformation file and the Jabberwocky encoded file for this part of it. Are there any other questions before we start? Alrighty, so I will set a timer for 15-ish minutes. And if you have any questions, either, I don't know if I could do the C hand thing, but you could just, turn on audio or whatever. And then, or in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. And then I'll call us all back. Or if you, in the chat, if you could say when you're like finished up, then that would give me a better idea of when to kind of round us all up again. Does that work for everyone? All right. Hi everyone, it's been about 13 minutes. Just wanted to come back and see where you all are, if you wanted more time, if you had any questions or anything. Oh, so the period, sorry, I had to figure out which part of it you were talking about. The period means everything. So all of the data within that one, trying to remember where it is, but it refers to grabbing everything and not a specific thing.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that makes, thank you.
Kind of in the same way that the slash does at the beginning. Oh, I just realized I did forget to mention, I mentioned the thing about the template. So at the very beginning of the XSLT file, there's that template match, which scans through the whole document, which isn't necessarily the most efficient way to do that. And you can create templates for specific tags kind of further down. You could say, oh, I want, you know, going off, if you did the W3 schools, the CD and catalog tag, you can have, well, for catalog, I want to do this with the styling. For every CD tag, I want to do this. And that way, it makes the file a little more efficient and run a bit smoother, as opposed to having to go through the whole thing to scan for everything. Are there any other questions, or did people maybe want to share what they tried to do? Did anyone try to load their own XML documents and play around with that? No.
I didn't have my own XML documents or anything, but I tried to use the what was given there on the W3 link and just tried to kind of manipulate that and see what I could get. And I couldn't get it to, I was going to try to like add the prices in a new column or something. I couldn't get that to work, but you know, we don't have to figure that out. I just wasn't able to do that.
Okay.
Like I see in the XML code there's a lot of extra information that we might
right, let me go one by one. I think for the W3 schools one, trying to add the prices, if you add a TD tag underneath the select title, select artist, and have the value of select, you should be able to, if you just really just copy and paste one of those lines and then add it below, and then change what's in the quotation marks to price. I believe that should work. And then it just adds a whole other column onto the table.
Cool, thank you, that works. I guess I was putting it in the wrong spot.
Yeah. You're trying to, XSLT is a relatively new technology to me too, and so trying to figure out kind of the order of things is definitely not intuitive, I would say.
Yeah,
okay.
thank you.
The question mark when test equals tag, yeah, it would be, you would use it like that. Country, like if it were a tag, wouldn't be in quotation marks. USA should be in quotation marks. The thing that you're comparing to should be in its own quotes. But other than that, yes, that is the way that you would use that. And Anna was trying to figure out how to include the line beginning tag and then any extra lines to line groups. Sorry, Anna, what did you mean by line beginning tag in the XML?
Yeah, so adding on the Jabberwocky poem, you have like an extra empty line in the line groups to create that space between everything.
Right.
Getting transformed in the table. So I was interested to see if there was a way to put in the line beginning tag into the XML and then how that would then get transformed into the table. Couldn't really figure it out to add that extra break, because it almost maybe you have to break it up into multiple tables, which doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, that was something I was playing around with too, to try to get the stanzas to stand apart. My solution was not elegant. You're right. It was a very kind of blunt force. I just want a space there. I think I even tried adding like line breaks, and those weren't working quite right. So yeah, there's a lot of further manipulation that I'm not, quite there yet to figure that out. But yeah, you're right. I'm sure there's a solution in there somewhere. Like, I don't know if it is adding like something into the XML that then gets transformed, or if it's somewhere else where that needs to be added. I don't know if the problem is that I found, I would normally do this with a loop that then I would then identify. I'll show this in a bit with the JavaScript, where I can identify after these many lines add a space basically. And since the loops in the XSLT don't have counters or anything, it's hard to identify when you want those spaces added. Well, good questions. Did anyone have anything else that they wanted to talk about with what they worked on? Well, if not, I will keep going. But that code is freely available to you if you want to use it. It's not like I'll lock the Google Drive or anything. So if you want to reference that at any point, that'll be open. I don't know about indefinitely, but certainly for the foreseeable future. So that's the XSLT. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is how to do basically the same thing, but with JavaScript. And I will say right off the bat, unfortunately, I don't have a hands-on portion for this. I ran into the same issue like with the XML, the cross-origin issues with security. Just loading an XML document into a browser, it's not happy with that. And even Internet Explorer got mad at me when I tried to do it. So it's very hard to kind of play around with this code, unfortunately. But I will show you how you could do the same thing in JavaScript, and if you want to follow along, it is in the Google Drive. And I will kind of go through it section by section and explain how it works. JavaScript, it performs the same function. I personally prefer it, partially because I'm more familiar with this kind of coding, but I also find it to be a bit more hands-on, and I understand more kind of what each little thing is doing. Whereas in the XSLT, like it is descriptive, it's a little less of that, how it's being done. So it's really more of a preference. There really isn't a major advantage to one or the other, but it also depends on the project that you're working on. So JavaScript, usually abbreviated as JS, is one of the core programming languages used online. It has a wide range of uses, and it works in tandem with HTML and CSS to create dynamic web pages and web experiences. And it can be used to pull XML data out of a file, actually any data out of a file, but you're only showing XML, and injecting it into an HTML document. So at the very top of the file, this is the script file. This is something that you would link to in your HTML page. So if you're following along, the two pages I'm looking at right now in the Google Drive are the HTML one and the JavaScript one. So at the very top of the JavaScript one, you basically establish that you're going to be pulling in XML data, and that when your HTML page loads, you want this code to load immediately. That's what this onReady state change is. And when you link to that in the HTML, it will run this code, and that means this code will immediately run. On line 7, this load XML into HTML function, that's something I created that can be any term that you come up with. So the next section is loading the actual document into the file so it's ready to use. This is that, if you, at the beginning, that XHTTP is just a variable I declared earlier. Up above, that's also something that could be any word you want. It doesn't have to have those kind of specific things in it. But yeah, you just have the path to the XML document that you want to load. And then the rest of the code is where all the stuff is happening. It's the major function. This is the thing that gets loaded up above. So you start by declaring it, and all it takes is the XML document. And then just at the top, I've declared a couple kind of blank variables that I will show how they get used later. A couple are to be used to hold numbers, a couple are to be used to hold text or strings, a couple are to be used to hold kind of XML document information. So the first thing I do is load this X variable with every instance of the tag I want. So it holds a number. And the get element by tag name is a helpful JavaScript function within its own library that goes into the HTML or the XML, whatever you're doing, and grabs what you want within those parentheses. So for this particular one, since it's a poem, I'd be grabbing every instance of the L tag or the line tag. And it gets loaded into that X variable. So in the Jabberwock, I think has 7 stanzas with 4 lines, so it should equal about 28. And then I have on line 27, the start of a loop. And what that loop is going to do is run 28 times. So it's going to perform a function for every single line in the poem. That's what that top line is. And then the next line is grabbing all the information. So it's basically saying here's an opening P tag, a paragraph tag, and then that complicated X of I dot child nodes, yada, yada, that is the actual information within each L tag. So it's the opening paragraph tag, here's all that data, and then, it's blocked by me, but yeah, and then it adds a, a closing P tag. And so that's all contained within kind of one unit. And then it runs that multiple times, and so you end up with multiple paragraph tags, each with a line of the poem in there. And so this is a conditional statement to, like Anna was wondering about, to add stanzas basically to have that separation. So on line 31, it's basically saying if you've reached 4 lines, so the 4 lines of each stanza, to then, this is where it gets kind of complicated. I'm so sorry I can't like show you this live, but hopefully you can follow along, and please feel free to ask any questions. And I know this is the more kind of computer sciencey portion of this, so I'm sorry if I'm losing some of you. So I have this kind of temporary number variable that starts off at 0, and each time this if statement is run, it adds 1 to it. And what this does is it lines up with each of the stanzas I have in my HTML document. I basically have 7 blank TD elements, those table cell elements, and they each have a class or an ID of stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3. And so when it reaches this point in the code, it adds whatever that kind of temporary number is onto the word stanza to get whatever ID in the HTML it needs to be. So the first time this runs, it'll be stanza 1, and then the next time it runs, it'll be stanza 2. And then this document.getElement by ID on line 36 is what actually pushes the XML code out to the HTML document. So what is in that HTML output is those 4 paragraph tags with the data in it, and it's being pushed to stanza 1 or stanza 2, whichever one it's gotten to in the sequence. And so in the HTML document here, you can see the table I have set up where tables I found are the easiest way to display poems. There are plenty of other ways. This isn't like a set method. There are plenty of ways to display poems and all sorts of data. So you can use this for anything. So basically there's nothing here. It's all blank information. The only thing needed here is the IDs. And so you can see on the right here, the output will look like all those P tags with the data inside. They'll be injected into whichever ID it needs to be. And so then the final document, when it would be loaded in a web page, would have the full layout of having these 4 lines within each cell, and then that slight separation that it does with formatting with tables, so you can get what look like clean stanzas. And in the end, it'll look basically exactly like the XSLT would look, with a bit more, adding styling and stuff. But that's how the JavaScript would work. But again, even within JavaScript, there are plenty of methods to do this. This is just kind of one that I've come up with. There's also different ways to kind of combine XSLT and JavaScript. You can do kind of very complex pastiches of both languages in order to kind of deliver XML documents to an HTML page. There's a lot of different options here. So that's all the information I have. Were there any questions or comments or concerns?
Yeah, Eliora, thank you for this presentation, very helpful. I have a question, a clarifying question really. So if we wanted to show something on HTML, let's say our content management site is WordPress, and then we wanted to do a transformation, do we upload both the XML and XLST into the WordPress site for that transformation to happen, or is that something else that needs to take place before that transformation will show on the web page?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure how WordPress plays with XSLT. My impression of WordPress is that it uses other languages to do transformations on XML. It does PHP and JavaScript and some other languages. But I didn't look into that. I would also be curious if WordPress, because yeah, a lot of their themes and files and stuff are XML based, how you load them. So I would be interested how it kind of loads that in. So sorry, I don't have a specific answer for you. To use the JS transformation, would you have to have a pre-structured HTML document prepared? Yes. There would be ways within the JavaScript to have more of the structure coming from that as opposed to the HTML, like having, like, if you wouldn't, there's a lot of repeated code in the HTML that you could put within the loop in JavaScript that would make it a little cleaner. But you would have to have an HTML document already set up in some way to have that injection with the JavaScript.
Eliora, I just have a kind of simple question, I guess.
Yeah.
Or like maybe a little rudimentary. But can you describe like the pipeline for the documents? Like obviously the XML is what gets worked on. It gets transformed with XSLT into HTML. And then so is the JavaScript like, are you using that after it's transformed into the HTML, or is it at this like, or just, I'm just confused as to how the JavaScript fits into the, I'm calling it a pipeline, but I'm sure there's a better word for that.
Yeah, using pure JavaScript would be instead of using XSLT. So it would be basically kind of hard coding those transformations yourself instead of using the XSLT library. So yeah, it's an alternative as opposed to in the example I showed. But like I said, there are, I know, methods of kind of using them together where you can have a JavaScript file that then pulls an XSLT that then is used on the XML, but it's a lot of layering.
Yeah, okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, XSLT versus JavaScript, do the transformations have to happen every time a user comes to the page, or could the transformation happen prior, like splitting out a formatted document, which is what you actually use on the site? Oh yeah, absolutely, that's a good idea. Have a document that's kind of created pre-loading it would certainly, depending on the size of your XML documents, certainly make it faster to load. Yeah, I've only used this method once on a live website before with the JavaScript and the XML, and I don't have any issues loading there. But I could see how that could cause problems with kind of larger, more complicated documents. So yeah, that is a good idea. Experience with Xpath, would you recommend? I'm not sure if you need any specific experience with Xpath before. I think having a kind of handy sheet ready with things you want to use. But also I think just having a kind of fundamental understanding of kind of the basics of coding would be really helpful for understanding Xpath, because it uses just a lot of the same kind of language that a lot of kind of basic programming structures use in terms of how you kind of construct elements and not functions, but you know, like statements and things like that. Any specific examples of times when it would be better to use one or the other, or just up to project preference? I haven't done enough experimentation, and the JavaScript thing was something that I experimented with and found worked for me. I haven't seen anyone else really describe whether one is better than the other. For me, it's mostly just a preference. I used JavaScript for my project, my live project, mainly because I couldn't figure out how to have kind of a small window within a website be styled with XSLT without having the whole document page be XSLT. I wanted the regular document just to be HTML, CSS, other JavaScript scripts and functions, and I just wanted a small window where the XML was going to live. And I had a hard time figuring out how to just inject the XML with XSLT styling into a window. So for that particular project, I found it easier to do it with JavaScript, because then I could say exactly where I wanted it to live on the whole web page. If that makes sense. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, well, I think that's everything. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I hope you learned something. I hope that was helpful. And yeah, the code will stay up on the Google Drive if you wanted to look at it, play around. Also, W3 Schools has not the most helpful XSLT tutorial, but some useful stuff on there if you needed kind of different ways of looking at it. They also have an explanation of the kind of interaction of JavaScript and XSLT in pushing XML to web pages, if anyone was interested in seeing how those kind of work together. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us.